Thank you for listening to the Living Zen-podcast. If you've been listening for a while and are wondering how you can take the next step in developing your own Zen practice, or how you can more formally connect with our community, please explore our online Orientation to Zen practice, which you can find on our website at zenwest.ca. If you enjoy the resources that we make available online, we would very much appreciate your support. There are a number of ways that you can help us continue to do the work we do. One of the best ways is by becoming a part of our community as an associate. Your commitment of $10 a month will ensure that offerings like the Living Zen-podcast, eZendo, and our online Orientation to Zen will continue to be available around the world to everyone with an interest in truly living Zen. To become an associate, please visit our website at zenwest.ca and click on Become an Associate. Many more Zen Talks are available for purchase on iTunes and at Amazon.com. Just search for Venerable Eshu Martin. These talks are also made available for free on our website for all of our members and associates. You may also want to download the Living Zen Podcast app, which makes downloading and listening to the podcast effortless. Thank you for your support, and thank you for listening to Living Zen.
Questions or comments? Venerable Eshu? Yes.
You listen to the podcast. I gave a talk about it just the other day. How long have you been sitting for now?
Not as often as I should. For a few months.
Huh?
On and off for a few months.
For a few months. And that's about exactly what I was talking about. It usually starts happening at about a few months. Have you listened to the podcast before?
Yeah.
Okay. Then there is one about sleepy zazen or Zen and sleep or something like that. But basically, in a nutshell, what I find happens with practice is, I'll just do a repeat of the talk, sort of. What tends to happen is when we're sort of going through our day-to-day lives, we're kind of very rigidly fixed in the conscious mind. And our unconscious mind is largely sort of out of play unless we're asleep. And so what starts to happen and so we have this sort of consciousness that is sort of chopped up into layers or bits. And so as we sit, what starts to happen is we start to settle in. The sort of barriers between what we call the conscious mind and the subconscious or unconscious mind, they start to really soften up a little bit. And so what often starts to happen is you start to, as we're sitting, your mental state starts to, I don't want to use the term sink because it's not really higher or lower. It starts to sort of expand, or your awareness begins to expand into the subconscious mind. And so often, for most of us, the only time that we really have that feeling of a softening of the sort of mental construct between the conscious and subconscious mind is when we start to fall asleep at night. So, at night you're lying in your bed and you're kind of thinking about the day and you start to drift off a little bit and you sort of have that kick, right? So that's kind of it's the conscious mind's defense against sort of like really letting go, that sort of gush into the sort of broader, expansive, non-linear subconscious mind. So I find what can happen a lot is that when we're sitting, and it's never at the beginning because we're really too concerned about what's going on and looking right and doing things right when we first start to sit. It doesn't happen. People don't get drowsy when they first start to sit. It's when we've been sitting for usually 2-3 months, our meditation really starts to sort of settle in, that we start to talk about, geez, I'm always getting drowsy when I sit. And for me, the experience was I did all kinds of experiments with it where, I'd have a good night's sleep, I'd have a good meal, well digested, cup of coffee, sit down, and still just get into this like, whoa, man. And because my attitude around meditation was like, it's got to be focused and I've got to be clear and, that it was this battle that got to the point where it was literally like, one of my teachers used to say, let Zazen do Zazen. And the message is, like, when we sit down to do meditation, we have a meditation agenda. This is the things that I need to work on, and these are the kinds of experience that I should have. And actually, your practice is operating on its own, and your agenda doesn't matter at all to your practice. So what used to happen for me was I'd sort of, had my breakfast, let it digest, have a cup of coffee, sit down, feeling great. Okay, let's sit. And and the whole time I was sitting was this battle of just going like, you're so weak, can you still? And over and over and over again. And for me, this was like 6 months of like war with myself. And it got so frustrating that at one point I said, like, really, what's going to happen? Am I going to just like fall right off my cushion? Am I going to completely keel over? What happens if I just relax into it instead of fighting it all the time? And what I found happened was not that I fell asleep. I never keeled over off my cushion. But what started to happen was that the sense of awareness changed from being a sort of a rigid sort of looking at-ness to sort of being a much more expansive, absorbed in-ness. So it wasn't like this sharp, like, I see everything kind of a perspective, but more of a I'm with everything. So oftentimes what I find drowsiness is in Zen meditation, except for the times when it is drowsiness. So like if you say, I slept for 2 hours last night and I've been studying for like 14 hours a day and, I've got a young child that never sleeps more than 20 minutes at a time and all this kind of stuff, like that might be sleepiness that you're experiencing. But if it's not that, usually what's happening is that your meditation is starting to deepen and that your states of consciousness are starting to open up and expand in your meditation practice. And because our only relationship with changes in levels of consciousness is generally when we are falling asleep, our reaction to that physical sensation of changes in a state of consciousness is the reaction of defense, or the reaction of like, oh, I've got to sort of like, I'm swerving off the road here. And so what we have to do, if you start to notice that, it's like a flag. So when you're sitting and you start to notice like you're doing the sort of like, bob and weave thing, pay attention to it, and instead of just sort of like allowing yourself to battle with it, consciously practice sort of softening into that experience. Even if you want to close your eyes and just sort of soften. And what you'll find is that after a relatively short period of time, when you open your eyes, the way that you're seeing things will change. I have like funny phrases, like I call it the goosh, and it's like, I don't know what else to call it, because that's sort of the experience, is like this sort of relatively structured thing just kind of goes, and that's your perception. And that's just my experience of it. So that's kind of, in a nutshell, my experience of drowsiness.
And the difficulty is I actually will fall asleep.
Maybe that's okay.
I will fall off.
Have you done it? Has it happened?
I fall off.
Oh.
I don't know what to do about it.
Have a nap,
I've done that.
and then get back up. Yeah.
It's not helping. And that impacts.
Well, just keep doing that. I mean, I don't recommend doing it in the Zendo. But certainly when you're practicing by yourself, I think that experimentation with what works, what your experience is really important. So sometimes, if you're sitting and that's where it needs to go, then that's where it needs to go. And if you have a little nap and then you get back up and sit for a little while longer, it's not a big deal. Yeah.
Is there a term
Monkey mind, yeah. Well, it just refers to how sort of we think, and there's a great sort of image of sort of there's a monkey in a tree and it sees something that it wants, so it sort of like swings over to the tree and gets what it wants. But then as soon as it's there, it sees something else that it wants, so it sort of sticks this one under its arm and swings to the other tree but loses this one, and then it gets there and gets what it wants, but then it sees the next thing and off it goes. And that's kind of, it's just a metaphor about how we tend to think and how we tend to pursue things, and how, we're like, the next thing, before we've even taken the time to enjoy the thing that we've arrived at, we're off doing the next thing. And that's what it refers to generally. Yeah. And there's lots of like Zen brush paintings. Monkeys are pretty often depicted in them for that reason, because it represents sort of like the scattered mind. A very famous one that is actually at the art gallery in Victoria is by Hakuin, who's a famous Rinzai Zen master, and it's the monkey reaching for the moon in the water. So, and there's a verse that goes with it too. So, yeah.
Question: can I connect to the Zen on iPhone?
Yes, there's an app called Adobe Connect. It's free, and that's all you need. Just download the app, and then you can connect directly with it. That was an easy one. Yeah.
Why do you practice with your eyes open?
Why do we practice with our eyes open? Because there's lots of different forms of meditation. Some of them are about sort of like finding a peaceful place within, or visualizing things, or but Zen practice is primarily about fully engaging with the environment that you're in at that time. And so with all of the senses, we engage in the middle way. So when we're using the eyes, that means that we're occupying the space between two extremes. The two extremes being looking at, so like sharp focus, or cutting off the sense entirely, which would be closing the eyes. So when we're sitting, our eyes are open. We sort of take in the entire sort of range of our vision, fully peripheral, but it's like a soft focus, so we're not sort of burning a hole in the carpet in front of us. And all of our senses we're trying to occupy that space between two extremes. So, for example, with sound, there are sounds that we like, and we tend to sort of move towards them. When we're sitting, a bird will sing, and we tend to go. Yeah. Immediately we're like, is that a yellow-bellied sapsucker I hear? Or bells, And then there's like car horns and stuff like that we sort of like squeege away from and try to sort of avoid. Oh, stupid baby, And so when we're sitting, the practice with the sense of sound is again to just sort of like equally open up the sense, so that you're sort of taking everything in without focusing on anything particularly, without blocking anything out. And in Buddhism, there are 6 senses, so sight and smell and taste and touch and hearing, and the mind is the 6th sense. And so it goes the same, where with thoughts, its object is thoughts and emotions and images. And we do exactly the same thing with the sense of mind as we do with all of the other senses. We're always sort of either veering towards one extreme or the other. So a thought comes up and we either go, oh yeah, that's cool, let's think about that. Or we go, oh, bad thought, I don't want to be thinking about that. And so we're always sort of in this sort of push-pull sort of thing. Emotions come up and we say, oh, that's a really good emotion, I'll like to feel that. Or sometimes we say, oh, what a terrible emotion, let's live there for a while, right? Or we go like, don't want to feel that right now, can't deal with that, let's not feel it. And so when we're engaging in Zen practice, the idea is to kind of throw all of the doors wide open. And so as things come up, as things pass in front of our visual field, our practice is to just be with them without choosing them or preferring them or grabbing onto them, and without rejecting them, with all of the senses, including the mind. So as we're sitting, we do these day-long intensives that Soshin was talking about, or we do 7-day intensives. And over the course of these retreats, you watch and engage with your mind and body and emotions and all of your senses, and you just watch through the course of them how there's this sort of like oceanic sort of rise and fall. And they can be really high peaks and really low valleys. And if we spend that time sort of occupied with that thing, like we're going, oh my God, I've never felt so terrible before in my whole life, and when's it going to stop? And it can be really torturous. But if we sort of return to that space, that sort of presence in the middle, which is allowing without rejecting or fighting off, and without sort of indulging in it, we're able to really perceive this sort of rise and fall of all of the senses, of what we're seeing and what we're smelling and tasting and touching and thinking and feeling. And so that's why what we're doing when we practice with our eyes open is really engaging in a practice of finding that middle space. So what's important is that when we're sitting and we say we sit with our eyes open, that the idea isn't to make ourselves into these sort of like rigid, like, God, I've got to keep my eyes open, or I'm doing it wrong. I always compare it to driving. So our experience is always sort of drifting back and forth. And our practice, like driving, is just to keep it sort of between the lines. So sometimes when we're sitting, something will pass by. Or maybe when we're walking outside, we'll see a flower and we sharply focus on it and go, wow, that's amazing. And when we find ourselves doing that, it's okay. And we recognize, we say, very nice. And then the practice is to sort of let it go and sort of come back to the center. So, we find ourselves when we're driving, we're sort of, our two wheels are on the line in the middle, and we say, let's pull ourselves back to the middle. And likewise, when we're sitting, especially for long days, we find ourselves like, and that's okay too when we find ourselves there. It's like the two wheels are on the other white line, and we just we open up our eyes, bring ourselves back to the middle again. And the reason for it, or the sort of value of it, when we're doing this with all of the senses, including the mind, including the thoughts and emotions, is that we become more skilled at doing that in the rest of our lives as well. Because we're always doing that. We're always veering one way or the other. Somebody says something and we go, or we sort of like I don't want to hear that right now, right? And so what we're doing when we're engaging in practice in this way of finding our home in this spacious middle way is that we're engaging in the practice of finding that middle way in all things in our lives, in our relationships, in our work, in difficult environments. And that's, as I was talking about tonight, that's really one of the great values of Zen practice. So.
Okay, I think it's time to wrap it up here this evening. Thank you all for coming.
Thanks for listening to the Living Zen podcast. If you follow Living Zen through iTunes, I would very much appreciate it if you would take a moment to let me know what you think about it by rating or reviewing the podcast, so that new listeners can also hear what you have to say. Thank you for your time and for your support.